Okay, everybody, welcome to our class. All right, so welcome to our CCNA security class for this week, our ITC class. One of the things I want to do this week is we're talking about Chapter 3. So we are getting into, actually somebody did upload something, AAA, so Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. This class and this chapter talks a great deal about Cisco Secure Access Control System. Cisco AAS is EOL, so it has been end of life. It has been replaced by Cisco Identity Services Engine, which is ISE or ICE. And so when we talk about ASA or ACS, excuse me, Access Control Server, really this day and age you're not going to be connecting to ACS. You're going to be connecting to ICE. So if you get a chance, take a look at this. It's their next generation of ACS, basically. But that kind of throws it out there. And they talk a little bit about it here, ICE. But ASA, again, has been, they're kind of rolling everything in ASA into this ICE product. Yeah, we do have a lot of packet traces this week. You're right, Scott. The good news about the packet traces are fairly short, and they're just, Chapter 4 this week is nothing more than ACL. So I'm probably not even going to lecture on that chapter because it's just access control is pretty easy. I really just want to hit the highlights on this chapter too, because we've done authentication without AAA. We've done a local database. The problem with the local database is, number one, it doesn't scale well. Number two, it is vulnerable to brute force attacks. And they talk about Telnet here, but you don't want to ever use Telnet. You'd want to use SSH, obviously. But, you know, we can do this, but it is still a very inefficient method, especially in this day and age when you want to integrate into a single sign-on type database. You want to log into your existing, pretty much your existing Active Directory database. So you want to do some type of LDAP connectivity to your database. We are going to look at the three components of AAA. One is authentication. Who are you? And that is actually the starting point for any of the AAA items, because authorization is what can you do, and accounting is what did you do. And so you can't have authorization or accounting and auditing without authentication. You first must know who is actually logging in. In this case, they give an example to a credit card. They say, hey, who are you? How much can you spend? What did you spend? All right. And these are not real numbers, by the way. Don't try to buy anything with them. That was a joke. So local AAA uses that local database. Only connection to the router. Again, not scalable, not super secure. Very difficult to implement in a large network. Server-based authentication is going to use the client connecting to the router. The router will then send that information over to the Cisco Secure ACS server, prompt for username and password, or ICE, or any TACUS/Radius server. In our lab, we just use a Radius server that's a free Radius server. That's something you also do in yours, just to be able to pass information over. Radius and TACUS are going to be the two different protocols. We'll talk a great deal about them. Well, not a great deal, but we'll talk about them as we move through this chapter. Those will be the two that are used to communicate with whatever AAA server you're using. So talk to ICE, talk to the other. And there are other ways you can talk to that server, but that's the two we're going to mention in this class. Once you're authenticated, you can be authorized. For instance, I'll give you a good example. On this network, well, let's go back. Let's think about last chapter. In last chapter, we had parser views. We had the ability to move commands to different levels. All right. So we did authorization. Of course, we had a username and password for that parser view in that level, but we had the ability to move commands around into different levels. So we're authorizing different levels to use different commands. In our setup here, one of the things that we did is we had the ability, when I log into a switch or a router, it passes the information over to ACS. ACS will then give me authorization for what commands I can run on that switch. Being a CCNP, they actually give me pretty much the ability to run commands on the switches. But it will then keep up with everything I do on a switch. So we've got the authentication. I got to put in my username and password. And by the way, we pass that information through ACS over to our AD, and the AD verifies username and password so that you don't have to have a separate ACS database. But through that process, once I'm authenticated, it authorizes me to do certain things on the network. Likewise, it keeps up with every single thing I do. And so every command I issue, they can go back and look at it. So they can look at, you know, there's different ways. What we're doing here is not network accounting because we're not looking at every single PPP connection I'm doing. For me, it's actually this. It looks at any terminal sessions. So anything I do on the particular terminals themselves, it keeps up with. Access command accounting is what they do. So anything when I'm in an exec shell, they keep up with it. And that's a neat thing because it lets us have different levels of admin. Someone who's not at the level of what I can do, they can have access to the routers and switches, but they may only get the show commands like the parser view we did. You can create groups in ACS, and then those will have certain commands associated with them, certain levels, which is a really neat thing. Any questions so far? We've done this local AAA, create a username. That username, you know, admin, junior admin, AAA new model, AAA authentication login default local case. Now, be aware, one of the things you always want to do is you want to create your usernames first, because as soon as you start adding in this AAA authentication login, it is going to, especially if you do default local case, it is going to apply that to everything except for the console. And you have to be very careful because it will actually do it. Plus all lines except those with line configuration override. So in fact, when you put this in, if you put that in before you put in usernames and passwords in the local database, you'll lock yourself out. Good news is you won't be able to do it right, so you can just reboot the machine and that won't be in the startup config. But be aware that could be nasty, especially if you pasted it in. Thanks, sir. So, some different methods. One of the things we can do with AAA is we can create different methods. AAA authentication login default, you can create a list name and then different methods so that you can have different authentication methods for different lines. So in this particular instance, you can see you can have an enable. So you can actually use the enable password as a method. You can use a local database. You can use the local database that is case sensitive. If you do local only with the AAA authentication login command, login local, it will not actually be case sensitive. But if you do local case, it will be case sensitive with the local database. None, obviously, is no authentication. Group radius, that will have it go to a radius server, which you will have to configure with the radius server commands. TACUS will go to a TACUS plus server, and then you can also do a group name, which allows you to define a set of TACUS servers. The thing that is important to realize is that none of this works unless you turn on AAA new model. So be aware of that. If you don't put in AAA new model, you can't change the authentication login types. So notice here we created 2 accounts. We did AAA new model. We did AAA authentication login default local case enabled. Okay. So the default method is going to be the enable secret password. Actually it's going to be local database, then enable if it's not available. And then you've got AAA login SSH login local case, which means you're going to apply this method, SSH login, to this line. And that requires you to put in a username and a password, and it is case sensitive when you come in via SSH. Pretty easy to understand. The big thing is it does get a little bit confusing just because it looks weird, but this is basically this method and this method. So when you look at the rules, you can do multiple methods, so you don't have to have just one. If you do multiple methods, it tries the first method obviously first, and if that method doesn't work, then it's going to let you put in the enable password. So for some reason it couldn't get to the local database, or there's nothing in the local database, it would go to enable. All right. Fine-tuning authentication, you can put the number of max fail, so the number of unsuccessful attempts you can put in there. You can put a login delay, which helps to do, unlike the login delay command, it helps to do, once it's done, it locks the account. So in other words, it's going to be locked forever. So you don't get to have a 30-second delay and then let them log in again. If you do max attempts, that's it, they're done. So you have to be careful with that. All right. Alrighty. Excuse me, show AAA sessions will show your session. You can debug AAA authentication so you can see what's going on. You can see here AAA authentication going on. You can see the user being put in there, our user. You can see the method being used. You can go through there and get password being put in, so pass. This should be, no, they don't show it. And unsuccessful, but you see this is, it was success. Wow, clicked on the wrong thing. There we go. It was a successful login. Now, server-based establishes a connection with the router, and then that is passed through, router prompts for username and password, and that is passed through to whatever you're using on the back end, be it ACS, ICE, Radius, a free Radius server, or that type of program, depending on what you're using. They're still showing ACS in this curriculum, and that's what's been mentioned on the CCNA security. So, you know, the other part, the thing here with ACS is or ICE is also able to talk LDAP to an Active Directory. So you can use LDAP to keep a single database, which is very good. So between here is going to be TACUS or Radius. Now we need to kind of introduce and understand TACUS and Radius, and you'll see on multiple security exams. I'm studying for CCNA CyberOps, and they're asking questions on TACUS and Radius. Now TACUS Plus, one of the things that I use to remember is TACUS uses TCP because it starts with a T. Okay. Now look, I had to play stupid tricks because I'm not the smartest thing on the planet. So when I'm trying to memorize things for exams, that's the kind of thing I'll do. Okay, TACUS is TCP. It uses TCP 49. All right. Now 49 works for me because it's a local road, so I'm kind of thinking about TCP 49. It is considered more secure because it does encrypt the entire packet. So everything that's sent between the router, in this case, if you were here and you were running TACUS over to the ACS Windows server, everything between the router and the server are encrypted, and it's on TCP 49. It also, okay, provides a separation of authentication and authorization. So it's not one thing, and so it does not have those two combined. Radius, which uses UDP, and I use the U in Radius to remind me of that. Radius uses UDP. It only encrypts the password between the router and the ACS server or whatever it's connecting on the back end. So only the password that's shared between these two is encrypted, not the full communication. So that is definitely a difference in security. It also combines authorization and accounting, but Radius has traditionally been used in dial-up environments and in environments where they need metering because it's much better at accounting. It is better at accounting, okay? It's just not as flexible because it combines authentication and authorization. The thing to remember about Radius is 1812 and 1813 of UDP, and that's kind of, I just have to remember those. Okay, now here they're showing TACUS doing authentication, connect, username prompt. So everything on this side would be encrypted, and it's all running from the router to the ACS would be on TCP port 49. Okay, so that is TACUS. Radius does pretty much the same thing. The only difference is It does not, it only sends the password. It doesn't send everything. Here, UDP, they mentioned port 1645, 1646. Most of what I've been reading and most of what you see is 1812, 1813. So 1812 for authentication and authorization, and 1813 for accounting. Again, I don't think you're going to see that. You might see that on CCNA security. It's possible, but you're definitely going to need to know this table right here and the major differences between these. Again, I'm seeing this in CCNA CyberOp study. I'm seeing it in the new CY ASA Plus from CompTIA study. So all of that needs to be something you need to kind of stick in the back of your head. Again, Active Directory can be integrated. It can be integrated with ISA or ICE. So one of the things they're talking a great deal about is bringing it on device, and how ICE has got all the device management abilities. So how do we configure it? It's really pretty easy. First off, you do have to have a TACUS or Radius server up and running. I mean, so that makes sense here. So we're going to have a Radius server using TACUS. Well, we're going to have one running TACUS on 1.100 and one running, one running Radius on 1.100 and one running TACUS Plus on 1.101. And we're going to do AAA new model, TACUS server, server T, that's the name of it, address, single connection. That enhances performance to keep a single TCP connection open for life of the session. Otherwise, it opens and closes one for every session. The key, whatever you happen to set the key to be, which that's the shared secret password, and then that would be it. You would have a TACUS server. You do the same thing with Radius, and it's just slightly different. So, AAA new model, Radius server, IP address, off port, accounting port, 1812, 1813, so you can set it since there is possibilities of being different. Key radius, and then exit. And now you have your router talking to both a TACUS Plus and a Radius server. Now, again, those servers need to be up and running. The other thing I teach my students is, you know, if you can't ping it, you're probably not going to be able to do your authentication to it. So I make sure you have full communication between these. Now, it's possible you could not ping it and be able to do authentication, because there could be an ACL doing that. But for the purposes of our labs, yeah, pretty much not going to work if you don't ping it. So now we set a AAA new model. We set all those, and then we do AAA login default group TACUS Plus, group Radius local case. So in other words, it's going to try TACUS. This is the group here, so it's going to go up here and look at this server. All right. And then if that doesn't work, then it's going to try Radius. If that doesn't work, it's going to try the local database case sensitive. And syntax checker has you doing that. So remember, you get, how many methods can you, did you happen to see how many methods max you get set? Okay, it was 4. So there's 4 max methods that can be set. So in this case, we used 3. So 4 is the max. Debug AAA authentication, and then you can actually see the TACUS trying to go across and the authentication response whether or not it's pass or fail. You can debug Radius, same thing. Debug TACUS. You can do all these. So if you want to debug an individual part of the TACUS process, you can actually do that. You can also debug all packets, where that could be a good amount of traffic. Here's this debug TACUS. This is all debug. So you can get a lot, but you see here how it's a auth response status equals pass. So it actually did pass the authentication. So get user, get pass, and then it passed. Here's one that fails. Get user, get pass, authentication failed. So you could take this, dump it out to a text file, and then throw it into a Linux text editor and do searches and find it if you got a big file. We do have a couple of videos that will show you setting up Cisco AAS. Authorization, like show version, for instance, this is exactly what I was talking about. It'll go across and say, do you have the ability to use this command? And if not, it will say no. If yes, it will accept it. The thing about this that's kind of cool, again, is remember, you've got to have authentication first. There's no way to be authorized if you don't authenticate. Radius doesn't have the ability to separate these two, so the problem with Radius is you got either all or nothing, whereas Tacus Plus will allow you to do this type of authentication and then authorizing certain commands. So Radius doesn't have that ability, but Radius does have better accounting features. So AAA authorization exec, so that is the executive level for starting executive shell. Also network will be PPP, and then you can do commands for a level in shell, so certain levels. So you see here the different, you can do it with a group, use a server group to do authorization. You can do a local database. You can go all the way out if user has authenticated. And of course you can do none, which is not very useful. But here's an example of AAA authorization. You got a username, you've got a AAA new model, authorized exec default group Tacus Plus. So it's going to go to the Tacus server. Authorized network default group Tacus Plus. So for network services, it would have to go over and be authorized on the Tacus Plus server to be able to use PPP sessions or other network sessions. Accounting, again, is what did you do? And the good news about ACS and ICE is they are central repositories. They can be integrated with other monitoring systems so that you can pull information out that is relevant. And you can do AAA accounting, network, exec, connection, all different types of options. This runs for this exec shell session, network. Be aware that something like this is going to do a pretty big amount of accounting. Okay, not saying that you won't have to do that in some environments. And you can also do connections for outbound connections. But you look at start stop, sends a start accounting notice at the beginning and a stop. That could be a good amount. Stop only. Then you can also disable accounting services if for some reason you wish to do that. You can set your list methods. Again, it can be Tacus or Radius. And here we have an example of doing authentication with Tacus, authorization with Tacus for exec and network with Tacus also doing a start stop. So whenever it starts, whenever it stops. Depending on your environment, that may produce so much information that it's useless. So you have to be careful with that. This is another item that you see quite often, especially in today. This is actually the wireless world. We see a lot. 802.1.x, which is port-based authentication that we can do on a physical port. These three items here show up on many different security exams. The idea of the supplicant, which is the client. The authenticator, which is the device that is sending information over to the authentication server. In this case, a Radius server. But in 802.1x, you can authenticate access to a port using things such as EPO and EAP. And so it speaks EAP on, typically it speaks EAP on the left side and it speaks Radius on the other side. So that you don't have to teach the supplicant, you don't have to teach the client Radius. It can already run EAP, which is pretty much built into all Windows operating systems anyway. It can easily be done there. So the supplicant and the authenticator, EAP, encapsulated in EPOL frames, and then between the authenticator and Radius, EAP is encapsulated in Radius. Again, that's so we can not have to teach the supplicant Radius. So if you want to do .1x port control, authentication, port control, and you can force it. So force authorize normal traffic without 802.1x authentication. So in other words, it will work without being authenticated. If you do unauthorized, it will remain unauthorized. Enable auto will have it actually do it. Unauthorized will keep it. Will not be able to do authentication at all. So it's in an unauthorized state. Let me look here and see the. Yeah. If you're in auto, you're in unauthorized state until you are able to authenticate. So only EPOL frames will come across, and then once you are authorized, it will allow non-EPOL frames. So basically, it puts the port into an authentication role only when you put it on auto, if you enable port control. Force authorize is the default setting on most switches, so that you don't have to do 8021X. So again, AAA new model, Radius server CCNS. You got to connect to it, give it auth port, accounting port. And we've seen that now 4 times. Radius password, AAA Authentication .1x default group Radius, which references this Radius. .1x system auth control, and then you go in here and say description, access port, switch port mode access, authenticate port control auto, and .1x PAE authenticator, which will set it to be an authenticator, port access entry. So it's only going to respond to as an authenticator. So, and that's it for this chapter. A neat chapter, looking at how we can do things. We're doing the same thing that we did in chapter 2, but we're doing it at a different scale. We're doing it at a now more in a true enterprise scale versus a very small scale. Spend some time looking at Cisco ICE. Spend some time looking at Cisco Firepower Management System, or Firepower Management Center, and some of those things that are coming out, because the this course is due for an update. I will say that it needs some things updated on it, but the basics are all there, and all of these items are items that again are showing up on other security exams. I'm going to stop my recorder. And Scott, feel free to type any questions